The widow's bed hides more than memories. What's the skeleton's secret? Welcome to Midnight Radio Drama. I am your host, Wilfred. Share where you're tuning in from. Your comments make this mystery come alive. I can't wait to read them. Let's begin. The morning of the Flaxborough Historical Society's annual luncheon unfolded with the precise predictability the town prided itself on. In the cosy drawing room of the Red Lion Hotel, local dignitaries and enthusiasts mingled beneath polished oak beams and the faint scent of lavender from freshly dusted curtains. The clinking of fine china accompanied subdued conversations about parish councils, lingering spring frosts, and the increasingly elusive best rhubarb tart recipe at Mrs. Fawley's bakery. Inspector Purbright, seated discreetly by a window, sipped his tea with the practised air of a man accustomed to reading between the lines of genteel chatter. The luncheon was, as ever, a parade of civility and quiet rivalries, a perfect microcosm of Flaxborough itself, orderly on the surface, simmering just beneath, with petty grievances and carefully concealed ambitions. The star of the afternoon was to be Mrs. Agatha Whittaker, the recently widowed owner of Willow Cottage, whose penchant for eccentric hobbies and antique curiosities was the talk of the town. Today she was to unveil a new acquisition, an ornate 18th-century skeleton purportedly found in the crypt of a nearby chapel, which she had lovingly restored and intended to display. As Agatha prepared to speak, the room fell into a respectful hush. Yet, just as she was about to lift the delicate cover from the skeleton's display case, a sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. The lights flickered briefly, and when illumination returned, the skeleton was gone. In its place, an empty velvet cushion and a single white glove lay conspicuously on the polished mahogany. A murmur of disbelief spread. Mrs. Whittaker's pale face betrayed shock, but also something more inscrutable. A flicker of irritation, perhaps, or disappointment. The luncheon, it seemed, had been interrupted by a theft as odd as the prize itself. Purbright's gaze swept the room, noting the myriad expressions: curiosity, amusement, thinly veiled suspicion. The disappearance of a centuries-old skeleton might have seemed a trivial oddity to some, but in Flaxborough, even the smallest breach of decorum rippled outward, unsettling the delicate balance of reputations and alliances. As the assembled guests exchanged theories in hushed tones, Purbright quietly set aside his teacup, sensing that beneath the surface of this peculiar caper lay a story waiting patiently to be told. And so the game began. The disappearance of the skeleton from Mrs. Whittaker's display swiftly became the talk of Flaxborough, its peculiar nature fitting neatly into the town's penchant for the eccentric. By the following morning, the story had sprouted wings, flitting from the railway, buffet to the post office, gathering embellishments as it went. At the Red Lion, where the Historical Society often met, patrons debated with a mixture of amusement and earnest speculation, their voices low enough to avoid troubling the hotel's rather nervous manager, Mr. Groves. Inspector Purbright, however, preferred to temper the town's restless curiosity with measured inquiry. He began by visiting Willow Cottage, a charming albeit slightly ramshackle house on the edge of town, where Mrs. Agatha Whittaker lived, surrounded by her collection of curiosities and antiques. The widow, a woman of a certain age, whose sharp eyes betrayed a mind still lively, despite the recent loss of her husband, greeted him with a reserved nod. "Inspector," she said, her voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable edge of irritation. "I suppose you're here about my skeleton." "Indeed, Mrs. Whittaker," Purbright replied gently. "It's quite an unusual item to disappear so abruptly during a public event. I hope you don't mind if I ask a few questions?" She waved a gloved hand toward a neatly arranged sitting room where oddities and relics crowded every surface. Not at all. It's been a trial keeping it safe, especially with the kind of gossip that tends to swirl around these parts. Purbright studied her, noting the way her eyes flickered toward a small cabinet where an empty, velvet-lined niche hinted at the skeleton's former place of honor. Do you suspect anyone in particular? Suspect? Agatha pursed her lips. In Flaxborough, one suspects everyone and no one. The more extraordinary the object, the greater the temptation for a bit of mischief. But I confess this was more than mere prank, it feels personal. And what leads you to that conclusion? The white glove, she said, pointing to a photograph Purbright produced, a detail captured by a fellow society member before the skeleton vanished. A deliberate signature. Not just a theft, but a message. Purbright nodded thoughtfully. Have you had any disputes recently? With neighbours, family, or others in the Historical Society? Agatha's smile was thin. Disputes are the lifeblood of any society, Inspector. There's been tension ever since my late husband's estate stirred the ambitions of certain individuals. Some felt my stewardship too bold, too unconventional. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock, and a tall, thin man entered, the Society's secretary, Mr. Penfold. His hawkish features were marked by an expression of mild concern. Inspector, Penfold began, if I may add, there's been talk that the skeleton's provenance is less certain than Mrs. Whittaker lets on. Some question whether it is genuinely as old as claimed. Purbright raised an eyebrow. On what basis? A few members have expressed doubts. Certain anatomical features don't quite match 18th century remains. There's speculation it might be a more recent creation, perhaps even a macabre joke. Agatha's eyes flashed. Speculation and gossip, nothing more. The skeleton was authenticated by Dr. Pritchard, a respected archaeologist. I trust his judgment. Purbright made a mental note to consult Dr. Pritchard himself. The shadow of doubt cast on the skeleton's authenticity added a new dimension to the investigation. If the skeleton was a fake, the theft might be less about the object's value and more about the embarrassment or rivalry it represented. Leaving Willow Cottage, Purbright next called on Dr. Pritchard at his cluttered study, which smelled faintly of chalk dust and antiseptic. The doctor, a bespectacled man in his 60s with a habit of pushing up his glasses when excited, greeted the inspector with enthusiasm. Ah, Inspector, I was wondering when you'd come by. The skeleton, you say? Authentic as the day is long, I assure you. Purbright smiled politely. Your expertise is invaluable, Doctor. Could you elaborate on your findings? Pritchard produced a series of photographs and notes. This specimen exhibits typical features of mid-18th century remains, the patina on the bone, the subtle signs of burial conditions consistent with crypt interment, and even traces of textile fibers indicative of burial shrouds of that period. Any anomalies? Purbright asked. None that would suggest forgery. The anatomical oddities mentioned by some skeptics are likely misunderstandings, an error in observation rather than fact. Purbright left the study with a clearer view, but also the unsettling feeling that the dispute over authenticity might mask deeper personal resentments. As the afternoon waned, the inspector made his way to the Red Lion to observe the Historical Society's latest meeting. The room was thick with murmurs as members gathered, their faces alight with speculation, rivalry, and the usual mixture of indignation and amusement that such events fostered. Among the attendees was Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove, a formidable woman whose sharp tongue and keen sense of social positioning made her both feared and respected. She regarded Purbright with a cool appraisal. "Inspector," she began, "if I may be frank, the whole affair reeks of theatricality. Mrs. Whittaker's skeleton was a curious addition, but not without controversy. Several of us questioned her motives for displaying it, an attempt to assert her place among Flaxborough's elite, no doubt. Purbright inclined his head. Social positioning can be a powerful motive, but theft, even of something so unusual, carries a weight of its own. Indeed, Mrs. Hargrove replied. And don't overlook the message sent by that white glove. It suggests someone wants Mrs. Whittaker to understand this isn't mere theft, it's a rebuke. The inspector noted her carefully chosen words and the subtle undercurrent of rivalry in her tone. As the meeting progressed, voices rose and fell with the ebb and flow of gossip and conjecture. Purbright listened, gathering nuances, and overheard aside here, a furtive glance there that painted a picture of a community delicately balancing pride, suspicion, and unspoken grievances. Later, Purbright spoke quietly with the Society's treasurer, Mr. Harold Finch, a man whose fondness for detail was matched only by his nervous disposition. "The theft," Finch whispered, "has stirred up old rivalries. The skeleton was meant as a symbol of unity, but instead it's become a catalyst for discord." Purbright nodded. "And the white glove?" "A signature," Finch said. "A calling card from someone who wishes to remain anonymous, but ensure their displeasure is known." As dusk settled over Flaxborough, Purbright retired to his office, the hum of town life filtering through the open window. The threads of the case had begun to knot: petty jealousy, social rivalry, and the shadow of a carefully orchestrated message, all entwined in a tapestry that was both fragile and complex. For now, the skeleton's absence weighed heavier on the town's pride than its sense of loss, but Purbright understood that beneath this veneer a quieter, more insidious disruption was at work. And as ever, he would unravel it with patience, discretion, and that quietly keen eye that saw more than others let on. The morning mist clung lightly to the low rooftops of Flaxborough as Inspector Purbright set out on his next rounds, the weight of the skeleton's disappearance pressing gently upon his mind. The previous day's inquiries had revealed a tapestry of petty rivalries and unspoken grievances, but beneath the surface lurked subtler motives, hidden glances, half-uttered hints, and the carefully measured words of those who preferred their secrets to remain just so. His first call was to the Red Lion's manager, Mr. Groves, a nervous man whose meticulous attention to the hotel's reputation was rivaled only by his unease at the luncheon's disruption. The small sitting room behind the bar smelled faintly of polished wood and damp coats. "Inspector, the whole affair has unsettled the staff," Groves confided. "There are whispers that this wasn't simply a prank. Some guests seemed almost too interested in the skeleton's provenance. And then there's the glove, white, impeccably clean, a curious signature indeed." Purbright nodded thoughtfully. "Did you notice anyone behaving oddly? Any strangers or regulars unusually attentive?" Groves thought for a moment. "Well, there was Mr. Aldous, the visiting antiquarian from Lincolnshire. He lingered near the display longer than most, asking detailed questions. Seemed a touch too keen, if you ask me." With a polite thank you, Purbright made his way to the modest lodgings of Mr. Aldous, whose reputation as a collector and scholar was well known, though not without a dash of eccentricity. Aldous received him in a cramped study lined with dusty tomes and glass cases of curiosities. The man, slight and spectacled, gestured to a chair with a nervous energy. "Yes, Inspector. I confess an interest in the skeleton." "Antiquities are my passion," he said, fingers twitching restlessly. "But I assure you I had no part in its disappearance." "Your presence at the luncheon was noted," Purbright observed. "Were you acquainted with Mrs. Whittaker or other members of the Historical Society?" "Only in passing," Aldous replied. "Though I admit her acquisition was the talk among collectors. Some questioned its authenticity, as you know. Have you any thoughts on who might benefit from its theft? Purbright asked gently. Aldous frowned. Difficult to say. Such a theft could be an act of rivalry or a calculated move to discredit Mrs. Whittaker. She's a formidable figure. Some might resent her assertiveness. Leaving Aldous to his books and curiosities, Purbright pondered the implications. The intersection of scholarly debate and social rivalry provided fertile ground for mischief. His next visit was to the village of Cartwell, where Mrs. Hargrove maintained a second residence. The imposing woman answered the door with an air of controlled severity, her sharp eyes sizing him up before inviting him inside. "Inspector, I hope your visit is as official as it is timely," she remarked dryly. "This affair has caused enough disruption." "I am here to understand the dynamics at play," Purbright replied. "Your opinions on Mrs. Whittaker's acquisition and its consequences are of interest." Mrs. Hargrove settled into a high-backed chair. Agatha's skeleton was more than a curiosity. It was a statement, a challenge to the established order, if you will. Many in Flaxborough viewed it as an unwelcome intrusion into our quiet traditions. "Do you suspect anyone in particular of orchestrating the theft?" She smiled thinly. "There are always those who stand to gain from others' missteps, but I prefer to observe rather than accuse outright." Purbright detected a hint of relish beneath her civility, a social predator sensing weakness. Returning toward the town centre, he stopped briefly at the home of Mrs. Whittaker's late husband's solicitor, Mr. Hardwick. The man was a model of propriety, his office filled with neat ledgers and legal tomes. "Inspector," Hardwick greeted him warmly, "the estate's unsettled affairs have stirred ambitions as you might expect." "Are there disputes that might motivate such a theft?" Purbright asked. "Possibly," Hardwick admitted. "The skeleton, while a curiosity, became a symbol of control, ownership not just of objects but of reputation. Removing it could unsettle Mrs. Whittaker's standing." Their exchange was interrupted by a soft knock. A young clerk entered, whispering of a new development, a letter sent anonymously to the Historical Society, demanding a meeting at midnight in the churchyard. Purbright's interest sharpened. The note, brief and unsigned, hinted at secrets ready to be unearthed under the cloak of darkness. That evening, Purbright made his way to the churchyard, the chill night air thick with fog. Shadows stretched long beneath ancient yews, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuated the stillness. A small gathering had assembled: Mrs. Whittaker, Mrs. Hargrove, Mr. Penfold, and several other society members, their faces taut with anticipation and unease. From the gloom emerged a figure, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy cloak. The stranger spoke with calm authority, warning that the skeleton's theft was but a symptom of deeper fractures within the society and town, hinting at concealed motives and old grievances threatening to surface. No names were given, but the message was clear. The status quo was fragile, and truth would demand its reckoning. As the crowd dispersed into the mist, Purbright lingered, contemplating the delicate balance of Flaxborough's social order. The skeleton's theft was a symptom, an outward sign of inward tensions that only careful, patient unravelling could hope to address. His investigation had taken a darker, more intricate turn, threading through whispered warnings, hidden resentments, and the ever-shifting alliances of a town that preferred its secrets, kept just beneath the surface. Purbright returned to his lodgings with a quiet determination. The game was afoot, and the next moves would require all his subtlety and discretion. The dawn broke with a muted glow, mist still lingering in the folds of the market square, as Inspector Purbright made his way to the Flaxborough Gazette offices. The anonymous letter from the previous night had introduced a new, unsettling layer to the mystery. Now, More than ever, the delicate social fabric of the town seemed to fray at the edges, and Purbright, with his characteristic patience, resolved to trace the source of the warning and the tangled grievances beneath it. The Gazette editor, Mr. Leonard Wren, was an affable man of middle years, known for his dry wit and love of local gossip, qualities that made his newspaper a daily ritual for Flaxborough's inhabitants. His office was a cluttered space filled with stacks of papers, old typewriters, and an imposing portrait of Queen Victoria that seemed to oversee the proceedings with an amused expression. "Inspector," Wren greeted him with a knowing smile. "I hear the skeleton affair has taken a turn toward the dramatic." Purbright offered a faint smile in return. "Indeed, Mr. Wren. I wonder if you've come across anything unusual. Letters, phone calls, anything that might shed light on the anonymous note sent to the Historical Society." Wren adjusted his spectacles. "There have been murmurs, of course. Anonymous tips are a staple of any investigation here. But this one seems particularly pointed. Someone eager to unsettle the society and perhaps the town itself." "Do you suspect anyone with a motive to cause such disruption?" The editor shrugged. "Motives in Flaxborough are as varied as the weather: petty jealousies, long-standing grudges, and the odd bit of social posturing. The skeleton has become a symbol more than an object. Remove the symbol, and you unsettle those who lean upon it." Purbright nodded, noting the editor's choice of words. "Any chance we might identify the letter's author?" Wren shook his head. "No clues there. The postmark was from a nearby village, too broad to be meaningful. But I did overhear a conversation at the pub last night. Someone mentioned seeing a figure near the Abbey grounds late in the evening." "A figure?" Purbright asked, his interest piqued. "Cloaked," they said, "moving with purpose. No one recognized the person, but it adds to the sense of mystery." Thanking Wren, Purbright set off toward the Abbey, its venerable stone facade looming beneath the pale morning sky. The Abbey was both a spiritual heart and a social landmark, its monks and lay visitors mingling in the carefully tended gardens, where the scent of early roses mingled with damp earth. At the gate, Brother Thomas greeted him with a measured nod. The monk's serene presence contrasted with the storm of whispered suspicions swirling in the town. "Inspector," Thomas said softly, "the Abbey has felt unsettled these past days. The skeleton's disappearance is but one symptom. There are tensions beneath the calm, old resentments and new fears." Purbright regarded the monk thoughtfully. "Have you noticed anything out of the ordinary? Visitors at odd hours? Unfamiliar faces?" Thomas hesitated. "There have been some inquiries from outsiders, historians, collectors, but also from those less easily categorized, a figure seen walking near the crypt after sunset, for example." "Do you believe the Abbey or its community might be involved in the theft?" "The Abbey strives for peace and discretion," Thomas replied, "but it is not immune to human frailty. If the skeleton's removal was meant to send a message, it may be tied to long-buried conflicts." Purbright took a slow walk around the grounds, noting the weathered statues and carefully pruned hedges. Near the crypt entrance, a faint indentation in the soft earth caught his eye, recent perhaps from someone having paused or knelt. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting knowledge of the Abbey's layout. His thoughts were interrupted by the approach of Eliza Everard, a local historian and a familiar presence in Purbright's inquiries. Her sharp eyes met his with a mix of concern and determination. "Inspector," she said quietly, "I've been reviewing the Society's records. There's more to the skeleton's provenance than has been publicly acknowledged." Purbright gestured for her to continue. The skeleton was part of a larger collection once belonging to the Whitby family, prominent figures in Flaxborough's history. Their lineage included secrets best left unspoken, disputes over land, allegations of impropriety, and a feud with the Abbey that lasted decades. Old rivalries rekindled then, Purbright mused. Eliza nodded. And the skeleton itself may have been a symbol in that feud, a reminder of power and disgrace. The implications deepened. What appeared a simple theft was entwined with the town's layered history, a drama enacted through symbols, reputations, and long memories. Later, Purbright returned to his office, where Sergeant Blythe awaited with new developments. A second anonymous letter had been received, this one more direct, hinting at a forthcoming revelation and urging caution. As he read the note, Purbright's mind sifted through the mosaic of motives and suspicions. The town's genteel surface masked currents of ambition, resentment, and fear. Each player held a piece of the puzzle, their words and silences speaking volumes beneath the veneer of civility. That evening, Purbright stood once more in the shadowed churchyard, where the night air was thick with mist and the soft rustle of leaves. The moon cast a pale light over the ancient stones, lending the scene an eerie stillness. He was joined by Mrs. Whittaker, whose usual composure now bore the strain of uncertainty, and Mr. Penfold, the Society's secretary, whose nervous glances betrayed deeper anxieties. Together they awaited the promised revelation, a meeting that might finally unmask the forces behind the skeleton's disappearance. When a figure emerged from the fog, a woman known to both Purbright and the others for her discreet but incisive involvement in town affairs, she spoke with measured calm. "The skeleton is not merely a curiosity," she intoned. "It is a symbol of fractured trust and buried secrets. To restore order, those secrets must be faced." Her words hung in the night air, a call for truth amid the shadows. As the meeting dispersed, Purbright remained, contemplating the delicate dance of secrecy and revelation. The mystery deepened, its resolution requiring more than simple detection. It demanded understanding of the human heart and the social fabric that bound them all. The game, as ever, was far from over. The chill of early morning settled over Flaxborough as Inspector Purbright made his way down the narrow cobbled street toward the town's Registry Office. The past days had drawn the boundaries of his inquiry ever wider, revealing layers of social intrigue that stretched back decades. But now the investigation required a firmer footing in the records of the past, a methodical search through the town's archives and registries to trace the lineage and history that tethered the skeleton, the Whitby family, and the simmering resentments of the Historical Society. Inside the Registry Office, a modest brick building with peeling paint and the faint smell of old paper, Purbright was greeted by Miss Edna Crowther, the town's archivist, and a woman of sharp eyes and formidable memory. She was perched behind a cluttered desk, surrounded by towering stacks of documents and ledgers. "Inspector Purbright, what a pleasant surprise," she said, crisply, adjusting her spectacles. "I hear the skeleton scandal has kept the town suitably entertained." Purbright smiled faintly. "Indeed, Miss Crowther. I wonder if you could assist me in tracing the Whitby family records, particularly any documents relating to the estate disputes and connections to the Abbey." "Of course," she replied, producing a worn leather-bound volume from beneath a pile of papers. The Whitbys were one of Flaxborough's oldest families, though their prominence has waned in recent generations. The estate disputes are well documented, with several lawsuits and accusations of impropriety that caused quite a stir in their day. As Miss Crowther guided him through the pages, Purbright noted references to bitter divisions over land ownership, accusations of clandestine dealings with the Abbey's authorities, and even hints of scandalous affairs, stories that the town's respectable circles preferred to keep unspoken. One entry, in particular, caught Purbright's eye. A report from a century earlier describing the mysterious death of a Whitby heir found under suspicious circumstances near the Abbey grounds. The coroner's report had ruled it accidental, but whispers of foul play had persisted. "Do you think this history is relevant to the current situation?" Purbright asked. Miss Crowther nodded. "Flaxborough thrives on its history, Inspector. The past is never quite buried. It shapes the present, especially in disputes like these." Armed with this context, Purbright next visited Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove's residence to discuss the societal dynamics with a sharper focus. The formidable lady received him with a mixture of curiosity and guarded civility. "Inspector," she said, folding her hands tightly, "the skeleton's disappearance is more than a mere lark. It is an act that unsettles the balance of power among our town's families and institutions." "And the Whitbys?" Purbright prompted. "They represent a fading influence, but their legacy still haunts many," Mrs. Hargrove replied. "The skeleton is a symbol of that legacy, something some wish to erase, others to preserve." Purbright allowed himself a brief smile at her choice of words. Symbols were indeed the currency of Flaxborough's social games. The afternoon brought a more surprising encounter at the offices of Dr. Pritchard, the archaeologist, who had authenticated the skeleton. The doctor's usually cheerful demeanour was clouded by a hint of unease. "Inspector," Pritchard began, "I must confess I have reservations. Recent examination suggests that some of the skeleton's bones exhibit anomalies inconsistent with their purported age." Purbright's brow furrowed. "Anomalies?" "Subtle differences in bone density and mineral content. It's possible the skeleton was assembled from various sources, an 18th century framework with additions from later periods." "Which would imply what?" Purbright asked quietly. "That the skeleton is, in part, a composite, an artful construction rather than a single historical artifact." The revelation added a new layer of complexity. If the skeleton was a fabrication, or at least partially so, then the motives behind its theft might shift from historical grievance to something more personal or reputational. Later, at the Historical Society's latest meeting, tensions simmered beneath polite discussion. Mr. Penfold, the secretary, announced that several members had received anonymous letters similar to those Purbright had seen. The letters hinted at revelations about the skeleton's origin and the Society's internal divisions. Mrs. Whittaker, ever poised, addressed the group. "Whether the skeleton is entirely authentic or not, its disappearance is a blow to our shared heritage and to my trust in this community." A murmur of assent was followed by glances exchanged with Mrs. Hargrove and others, each weighing the implications. Purbright observed the interplay of loyalties and suspicions with quiet interest. The case was no longer just about an object, but about fractured trust and the fragile bonds of social order. That evening, Purbright sat in his office, piecing together the fragments of history, rivalry, and human nature. The anonymous letters, the skeleton's questionable authenticity, and the town's whispered resentments formed a puzzle that demanded careful assembly. Outside, the streets of Flaxborough settled into the familiar rhythm of night, but within its houses and hearts quiet dramas unfolded, awaiting resolution, by a man who knew that beneath the veneer of civility, human nature rarely conformed to expectations. The morning sun filtered weakly through the lace curtains of Purbright's study, casting a pale light on the cluttered desk, strewn with reports, letters, and a small, curious object, a single white glove, immaculate and oddly out of place amidst the official documents. It had been discovered near the site of the skeleton's disappearance, tucked discreetly beneath a bench in the town square. Such a trivial item, yet it prickled the inspector's curiosity in a way that mere evidence rarely did. Purbright fingered the glove thoughtfully. It was of fine make, the kind favoured by those careful to maintain appearances, clean, elegant, and, as Miss Crowther had pointed out during an earlier conversation, conspicuously out of place in a town where practicality usually trumped fashion. The glove seemed a small but deliberate token, one that spoke not just of a presence, but of intention. Resolving to follow this thread, Purbright arranged a visit to Miss Marjorie Clift, the town's milliner, and purveyor of gloves, hats, and other accoutrements of gentility. Her shop, nestled between the bakery and the tailor's, was a sanctuary of silk ribbons, fine lace, and an array of finely stitched gloves displayed behind the glass. Miss Clift herself was a woman of a certain age and dignity, with sharp eyes softened by a habitual smile. She greeted Purbright with the practised charm of one used to serving Flaxborough's varied clientele. "Inspector, how can I assist you on this fine morning?" she inquired, adjusting a small velvet hat perched askew on a mannequin. Purbright produced the glove carefully. "This was found in the town square. I understand you deal in such items?" Marjorie took the glove in her hands, inspecting it closely. "Ah, yes. A fine example indeed, made by the Cobwell firm in London, a touch of luxury for a small town. Only a handful of clients would purchase gloves like these." "Do you recall who recently bought this style?" Purbright asked gently. Marjorie considered, tapping a manicured finger against her lip. "Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove has several pairs, all immaculate. She's quite particular about her appearance. But there is also Miss Evelyn Trent, young, somewhat new to town, with an affinity for elegant accessories." "Both notable figures," Purbright murmured. "Would you say the glove's size or shape gives a clue as to the owner?" "Size 6½ slender fingers." The glove could fit either, but Mrs. Hargrove tends to favour gloves with a slightly tighter fit. "Thank you, Miss Clift. Your insight is most helpful." Later that afternoon, Purbright paid a discreet visit to Mrs. Hargrove's residence. The imposing Georgian house stood sentinel over a manicured garden, its windows gleaming with the pride of order and tradition. Beatrice Hargrove received him with her customary blend of civility and controlled hauteur. "Inspector, to what do I owe this unexpected call?" she asked, pouring tea with deliberate grace. Purbright broached the subject cautiously. "I understand you possess gloves of this kind. Might I inquire if one has recently gone missing?" Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed slightly. "I am meticulous in my possessions, Inspector. If a glove were missing, I should know." "Indeed," Purbright replied, offering a faint smile. "Perhaps the glove belonged elsewhere. Miss Evelyn Trent was also mentioned as a possible owner." The name seemed to unsettle Mrs. Hargrove for a fleeting moment, quickly masked by a polite nod. "Miss Trent is new to Flaxborough," she said smoothly. "One must allow newcomers some leeway." "Do you know Miss Trent well?" Purbright pressed. "Only in passing. She is a charming young woman, but I sense she navigates our social circles with some caution." His curiosity deepened. Miss Trent had appeared on Purbright's radar before, as a volunteer at the Historical Society and a frequent visitor to the Abbey gardens. Yet there was something elusive about her presence, a hesitance that hinted at secrets beneath the genteel's surface. Purbright decided to seek out Miss Trent directly. He found her in the public library, absorbed in a tome on local history. She looked up as he approached, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Inspector Purbright," she said, rising with grace. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" He introduced the matter of the glove delicately, watching her reaction. Evelyn's fingers tightened momentarily around the book's spine, a subtle gesture, but one Purbright noted. "I cannot say the glove is mine," she said calmly, "but I confess to an interest in such things. Gloves, like history, carry stories of those who wore them and the roles they played." "Indeed," Purbright agreed. and sometimes those stories intertwine with more immediate concerns. Evelyn's gaze held his. I came to Flaxborough, seeking a fresh start. The skeleton's disappearance unsettles me as much as it does the rest of the town. Do you feel out of place here? Purbright asked quietly. Sometimes, she admitted. But I have made acquaintances, though not all are welcoming. There are old alliances and new tensions. The conversation lingered on the edge of confession, but Evelyn remained cautious. Before he could press further, a call summoned her away, a reminder of the social tightrope she walked. Later that evening, Purbright reflected on the small but telling clues, the glove, the social circles, the subtle unease. Each detail added nuance to the unfolding mystery. He resolved to observe more closely the interactions among the key players, for it was in the glances exchanged, the pauses in conversation, and the unspoken tensions that the truth might quietly reveal itself. The game was growing more intricate, the dance of secrets and half-truths continuing beneath the town's polite veneer. The early evening descended over Flaxborough with a softened light that filtered through the slender branches of the sycamores lining Market Street. The usual hum of genteel conversation spilled from the windows of the Red Lion, and the faint clatter of china from tea-rooms hinted at the town's stubborn adherence to routine amidst the ripples of unrest stirred by the skeleton's disappearance. Inspector Purbright, trench coat buttoned and hat slightly askew, walked with the deliberate pace of a man attuned to the subtleties of his surroundings. The case, far from yielding its secrets, was revealing a complex choreography of small-town grudges, whispered alliances, and unspoken challenges. Purbright's destination was the home of Mr. Leonard Penfold, Secretary of the Historical Society, and an unassuming man whose meticulous attention to detail had proved invaluable. The narrow path leading to Penfold's cottage was bordered by neat flower beds, each bloom arranged with the precision of a craftsman's hand, a reflection of the man himself. Penfold greeted Purbright at the door, his usual nervous smile tempered by a shadow of fatigue. "Inspector, please come in. These past days have been quite taxing on us all." Inside, the cottage was a modest affair, lined with shelves crammed full of journals, old photographs, and volumes on local history. The air was tinged with the scent of ink and dust. "I gather the anonymous letters and the midnight meeting have stirred the pot considerably," Penfold began, pouring 2 cups of tea with a trembling hand. "There's talk, quiet but persistent, of factions within the society, old friends now at odds over the skeleton's significance and its rightful place." Purbright accepted the cup, nodding. "It appears the skeleton is more than a mere artifact. It's become a symbol in a broader struggle between tradition and change, influence and obscurity." Penfold sighed. "Indeed, Mrs. Whittaker and Mrs. Hargrove represent opposing poles. The former is passionate about preserving the skeleton's place as a centerpiece, while the latter regards it as a relic best confined to the past, a symbol of divisions better left forgotten." "That tension extends beyond the society?" Purbright inquired. "Regrettably, yes. There are whispers of long-standing feuds among families and town officials. Some see the skeleton's theft as an opportunity to unsettle certain players." As they spoke, the conversation drifted to the peculiar behavior of Miss Evelyn Trent. "She's an enigma to many," Penfold remarked, "new to Flaxborough, but quick to involve herself in society affairs. Some welcome her enthusiasm. Others regard her with suspicion." Purbright considered this quietly. Evelyn's guarded nature and connection to the white glove suggested she might hold a key to the unfolding drama. "Have you noticed anything else unusual?" he asked. Penfold hesitated. "There was an incident last week, an outburst at a council meeting, surprisingly public. Mrs. Hargrove accused a junior councillor of undermining the town's dignity in relation to the skeleton controversy. Tempers flared, and the matter was hastily closed. That might be worth further attention, Purbright mused. Political manoeuvring often accompanies social unrest. Later that evening, Purbright attended the council meeting held in the austere chamber of the town hall. The atmosphere was thick with polite tension as members exchanged measured remarks. Mrs. Hargrove's presence dominated the room, her sharp gaze cutting through the murmurs. Purbright noted the subtle exchanges, a flicker of recognition here, a nervous glance there, as the skeleton's shadow seemed to loom over proceedings. When the floor opened for public comment, a voice from the back, soft but firm, drew attention. It was Evelyn Trent. "Esteemed councillors," she began, "Flaxborough's heritage is a treasure we all share, yet the recent events suggest that preservation must be tempered with honesty and transparency. Secrets kept in shadows do no one service." Her words rippled through the chamber, met with a mixture of nods and guarded looks. Mrs. Hargrove responded coolly, "Miss Trent speaks with passion, but may underestimate the complexities of our town's traditions and relationships." The exchange encapsulated the ongoing struggle, a clash between the old guard and the emerging voices. After the meeting, Purbright caught a brief moment with Evelyn. "Your remarks were well considered," he said. "Do you believe the society and the council are prepared for change?" Evelyn's eyes met his steadily. "Change is inevitable, Inspector. The question is whether it will come willingly or be forced by circumstance." Their conversation was interrupted by a messenger bearing a note for Purbright, a cryptic message suggesting a meeting at a secluded spot near the old mill that very night. Curiosity piqued, Purbright decided to investigate, mindful of the delicate balance between public inquiry and private discretion. Under the cover of darkness, he made his way to the mill, its weathered timbers creaking softly in the night breeze. The river murmured nearby, and the moon cast silvery reflections on the water's surface. A solitary figure awaited him, a woman wrapped in a heavy cloak, her features partly obscured by the hood. As she stepped forward, Purbright recognized the determined set of her jaw. "Inspector Purbright," she said in a low voice, "there are truths you have yet to uncover. The skeleton's theft is a symptom, not the cause." Her words sent a ripple of intrigue through Purbright's thoughts. Who was this woman, and what secrets did she guard? The town's peaceful exterior had become a veneer, concealing currents of ambition, fear, and old resentments. As they spoke, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. The figure glanced toward the noise, then back to Purbright. "The past will not rest quietly," she warned, "and neither will those who seek to protect it." Before Purbright could respond, she slipped away into the darkness, leaving him with more questions than answers. Returning to town, Purbright felt the weight of the case deepen. The mystery was no longer a simple matter of stolen relics, but a tangled web of human frailty, social rivalry, and the relentless pursuit of truth beneath layers of civility. The inspector's resolve solidified. The game was far from over, and every move must be measured with care. The early dawn found Flaxborough wrapped in a pale mist that softened the outlines of buildings and trees alike, lending the town an air of quiet expectation. Inspector Purbright, ever the early riser, had spent much of the night reflecting on the enigmatic meeting by the old mill. The woman's words echoed in his mind. The theft was but a symptom, the real cause concealed beneath layers of long-held grudges and veiled ambitions. With that thought, Purbright resolved to delve deeper into the town's social fabric, seeking those subtle threads that bound past and present. His first visit was to the town's modest parish church, where Reverend Alistair Grimshaw was already engaged in morning prayers. The clergyman's austere presence was a counterpoint to the growing complexity of the case, and Purbright valued his insight into Flaxborough's quieter corners. "Good morning, Reverend," Purbright greeted, removing his hat. "Inspector," Grimshaw responded with a nod. "These are troubling times for our peaceful community." Purbright recounted the recent developments, emphasizing the hints of discord beneath the town's genteel exterior. "Do you sense that the Abbey or the church might be entwined in these tensions?" Grimshaw sighed, folding his hands. "The Abbey has long been a pillar of tradition, but no institution is immune to human frailty. There are those who resist change, and others who cling to memories that may no longer serve the community. Have you observed any unusual visitors or gatherings of late?" The Reverend hesitated. "There was an evening meeting not long ago, attended by some local dignitaries and a few outsiders. The topics were veiled in discretion, but there was a palpable urgency." This aligned with Purbright's own observations. The more he peeled back layers, the clearer it became that the skeleton's disappearance was intertwined with efforts to influence Flaxborough's future direction. Leaving the church, Purbright's next stop was the town library, where Evelyn Trent was cataloguing new acquisitions. Her presence had become a fixture in the unfolding drama, and Purbright regarded her as both a source of information and a figure enmeshed in the town's shifting alliances. "Miss Trent," he said, "I trust your evening at the council meeting was not too arduous?" She smiled faintly. "The usual polite disagreements, Inspector, yet I sensed that beneath the surface the currents run deep." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Marjorie Clift, the milliner, who brought news that added an unexpected twist. "Inspector, you may find this relevant. I received an anonymous parcel this morning. Inside, a fragment of red silk and a note bearing a single word. Remember." Purbright examined the silk, a small, delicate piece, the colour vibrant against the muted tones of the library. "Red silk," he mused aloud. "A symbol, perhaps, or a calling card." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Marjorie. "Red is a colour with significance here, associated with the Abbey's vestments and, intriguingly, with the so-called nun who wore red, a figure from Flaxborough's folklore." The mention sparked a recollection in Purbright. The local legend told of a nun who defied convention, her story woven into the town's hidden narratives of rebellion and scandal. Determined to pursue this lead, Purbright arranged a meeting with Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove, whose fascination with the town's history was matched only by her guarded nature. In the drawing-room of her stately home, surrounded by portraits of austere ancestors, Hargrove regarded the fragment with thinly veiled suspicion. "Red silk?" she said slowly. "It is a provocative symbol. To send such a token is to remind us that some stories refuse to be forgotten." "Do you know the origins of this particular red?" Purbright inquired. "It is said to come from the robes of a nun who centuries ago challenged the Abbey's authority. Her defiance became legend, but also a warning to those who might disrupt the established order." Purbright considered the implications. The symbol of red was more than mere fabric. It was a message directed at those aware of Flaxborough's secret histories and present fault lines. As evening fell, Purbright found himself drawn back to the Abbey gardens, where the moon cast long shadows over ancient stones. Here he encountered Brother Thomas once more, who spoke quietly of old allegiances and the persistence of memory. "The past does not rest easily in Flaxborough," Thomas said. "The nun who wore red is a reminder that even sacred walls cannot contain human will." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a figure from the shadows, a woman whose features were familiar yet elusive. It was Evelyn Trent. "I have come to warn you," she whispered urgently. "There are those in town who would see this matter closed quickly at any cost, but the truth demands patience. Purbright nodded, sensing the delicate balance they all walked. The night deepened, and with it the mystery wove tighter. The red silk, the whispered legends, and the subtle threats formed a tapestry of intrigue that challenged the inspector's every assumption. As he retired for the night, Purbright knew that the case was moving toward a pivotal moment where history and present would collide, and where the true motives hidden beneath politeness would emerge into the light. The afternoon drizzle lent a silvery sheen to the cobblestones of Flaxborough's High Street, and a faint chill hung in the air as Inspector Purbright made his way to the town's railway buffet. The modest establishment, known for its unassuming tea and occasional gossip, had unexpectedly become a nexus for discreet conversation and overheard whispers, precisely the sort of venue where Purbright often found his best leads. The mystery of the skeleton's disappearance, the cryptic red silk, and the subtle undercurrents of rivalry were beginning to coalesce into a knot that demanded closer scrutiny. Inside, the buffet was modestly busy, the low murmur of voices blending with the clink of teaspoons against china. Purbright settled at a corner table, ordering a pot of Darjeeling, and allowed his keen gaze to sweep the room. His attention was all drawn to a small group near the window, their conversation a muted exchange punctuated by occasional glances toward the entrance. Among them sat Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove, the formidable lady whose social influence had been a thread through much of the investigation, and opposite her Mr. Leonard Penfold, secretary of the Historical Society, whose nervous energy seemed at odds with the confident poise of his companion. Purbright listened carefully as their dialogue drifted, catching fragments that hinted at unresolved tensions and veiled accusations. Mrs. Hargrove's voice was low but firm. "The Society must protect its heritage, Leonard, yet I fear there are those within who would see it diluted or discarded." Penfold's reply was hesitant. "We all have our loyalties, Beatrice, but truth cannot be sacrificed to sentiment." The exchange suggested a schism within the Historical Society, a fissure that might explain some of the anonymous letters and covert meetings Purbright had uncovered. Nearby, the figure of Evelyn Trent emerged, slipping unobtrusively to a nearby table. She spoke briefly to the waiter in a hushed tone, then settled to observe the room with a thoughtful expression. Her presence, once considered peripheral, now seemed central to the evolving puzzle. Purbright rose and approached her table. "Miss Trent," he said softly, "you seem well placed to observe the currents that run beneath Flaxborough's placid surface." Evelyn glanced up, her eyes reflecting a quiet determination. "The town's surface conceals much, Inspector. The skeleton, the silk, even the whispers of the nun who wore red, all are parts of a larger story." Before Purbright could reply, a commotion near the buffet counter drew their attention. A young man, flushed and breathless, had just arrived and was speaking rapidly to the proprietor. It was Arthur Gibbons, a junior clerk at the town hall, known for his eagerness and occasional lapses in discretion. "I have news for Inspector Purbright," Arthur announced, scanning the room. "It concerns the council meeting last week and a document recently uncovered." Purbright signalled for calm and invited Arthur over. "Please, Mr. Gibbons, do explain." Arthur lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I found a file tucked away in the archives, minutes from a previous council meeting held over 20 years ago. There's a reference to a covenant involving the Historical Society and the Abbey stipulating conditions for the custody of certain artifacts, including skeletal remains." "Fascinating," Purbright mused, taking the document from Arthur's trembling hands. The paper was aged but legible, bearing signatures and annotations that hinted at a delicate balance of power and responsibility. "Does this change your view of the skeleton's significance?" Evelyn asked. "Indeed," Purbright replied. "It confirms that the skeleton is not merely a curiosity, but a symbol entwined with legal and social obligations, a matter of pride and politics." The conversation shifted as Arthur recounted rumours circulating among council members of secret meetings to decide the fate of the skeleton and the tensions those decisions had ignited. Purbright's thoughts returned to Mrs. Hargrove's admonitions and Penfold's nervousness. The Historical Society was clearly divided, and the skeleton had become a fulcrum of power struggles that stretched back generations. Later, Purbright visited the Abbey's records room, where Sister Agnes, the archivist, assisted him in examining the ecclesiastical documents. The air was cool and thick with the scent of parchment as they sifted through ledgers and correspondence. "Here," Sister Agnes pointed to a faded letter, "is a communication from the bishop regarding the handling of relics, emphasizing discretion and reverence." Purbright noted the tone, careful, almost evasive, suggesting that the Church's role in the matter was as much political as spiritual. As he left the Abbey, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and the town seemed to hold its breath beneath the heavy grey skies. Returning to his office, Purbright reflected on the day's revelations. The skeleton was a nexus of ancient agreements, social rivalries, and personal ambitions, a silent witness to Flaxborough's complex dance between past and present. He understood now that the key to resolving the mystery lay not just in uncovering who had taken the skeleton, but why and which interests they served. The next moves would require careful diplomacy, keen observation, and perhaps a subtle test to draw the truth into the open. The dim glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across Inspector Purbright's cluttered office as evening deepened outside. The day's discoveries had woven a complex tapestry, ancient covenants, factional strife within the Historical Society, veiled warnings of the nun who wore red, and yet the puzzle remained incomplete, tantalizingly just beyond full grasp. Purbright sat back in his chair, hands folded, mind turning over each detail with his characteristic patience and precision. The door creaked softly, and Sergeant Gladys Morris stepped in, clutching a folder. "Inspector, a visitor for you." Miss Evelyn Trent Purbright smiled faintly, gesturing toward the empty chair opposite his desk. "Please send her in, Gladys." Evelyn entered with her usual composed grace, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Your presence is always welcome," Purbright replied. "To what do I owe this visit?" She placed the folder on his desk. "I've been reviewing some of the town's older newspapers and found references to a scandal involving the Abbey and a woman known as the Red Nun, a tale of forbidden love and secrecy. It appears the skeleton may be tied to that story." Purbright leaned forward, intrigued. "Do tell." Evelyn opened the folder to reveal yellowed clippings. The woman, Sister Matilda, was said to have worn a red habit as a mark of defiance. The affair ended tragically, but her story was suppressed. The skeleton might be hers, or at least connected to that lineage. That would explain the red silk fragment, Purbright mused. A message, perhaps, from someone wishing to keep the past alive or to warn. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Gladys entered with another visitor, Beatrice Hargrove. Her expression was guarded but resolute. "Inspector," Beatrice began, "I believe it is time we discussed matters frankly." Purbright gestured to the seats. "Please, Mrs. Hargrove, join us." The three settled into a careful discourse, the air thick with unspoken tensions. Beatrice's tone was measured. "The skeleton's disappearance has stirred more than curiosity. It threatens the town's delicate balance." Evelyn's gaze was steady. "Change is inevitable, Mrs. Hargrove. Suppression only breeds resentment." The exchange highlighted the clash between preservation and progress, secrecy and transparency. Purbright intervened gently. There is more at stake than mere history. Trust and reputation are woven tightly here. We must consider who benefits from the skeleton's absence. Beatrice's eyes flickered. You suspect someone within the Historical Society? Or perhaps beyond it, Purbright replied. This theft was no impulsive act. The evening deepened as they dissected motives and possibilities, each revealing glimpses of their own convictions and fears. Later, alone, Purbright pondered the silent witnesses in his office, the faded photographs, the worn ledgers, the single white glove resting near the desk lamp's glow. Each was a clue, a piece of the social puzzle. Resolving to test his suspicions, Purbright planned a discreet gathering the following evening, a controlled setting in which truths might surface naturally. He sent invitations to key figures, Evelyn Trent, Beatrice Hargrove, Leonard Penfold, and Miss Marjorie Clift, the milliner. The venue would be a small, neutral room in the town hall, arranged for civility, yet charged with the unspoken promise of revelation. When the evening arrived, the participants gathered with the polite restraint of those accustomed to formal social niceties, but beneath the surface simmered the subtle tensions of old grudges and guarded secrets. Purbright opened the meeting with measured words. Thank you all for attending. I believe the time has come to address the uncertainties surrounding the skeleton and its place in Flaxborough's story. He paused, letting the weight of his statement settle. Some of you have spoken of the past with passion and conviction. Others have chosen silence or obfuscation. My task is to understand these layers. He then produced a small item, the white glove found near the town. Square. This glove, he said, though small, represents a link, a presence near the scene at a crucial time. Eyes shifted, glances exchanged. To whom might this glove belong? Purbright asked gently. Beatrice's gaze hardened momentarily. I own gloves of that make, Inspector, but this one is not mine. Evelyn remained composed. Neither mine, though I am familiar with their style. Leonard Penfold swallowed nervously. I cannot say, Miss Clift observed quietly, offering no claim. Purbright then recounted the day's findings, historical documents, the red silk, the legend of the nun who wore red, and the undercurrents of power and secrecy. As he spoke, subtle reactions unfolded, tightened lips, averted eyes, brief flickers of unease. Then Purbright addressed the room more pointedly. This is not merely a question of history or pride. Someone wished to send a message, one that speaks to respect, to silence broken, and to truths hidden. He looked directly at Beatrice Hargrove. Mrs. Hargrove, your devotion to tradition is well known, yet the recent council outburst suggests personal stakes. She met his gaze steadily. I seek only to preserve what is rightfully ours. And you, Miss Trent? Purbright turned. Evelyn's voice was calm but firm. I represent a voice for openness, for reckoning with the past honestly. The tension thickened as Leonard Penfold shifted uneasily. Purbright then revealed a final detail, a diary entry found among Sister Agnes's archives, referencing a secret meeting of town dignitaries to suppress scandal related to the Red Nun. Someone wished the truth buried, Purbright said, and someone was willing to act to ensure that. The room fell silent. Then Miss Clift broke the stillness. I believe the glove belongs to Mrs. Whittaker. All eyes turned toward the door as the last guest arrived, Mrs. Florence Whittaker, long-time president of the Historical Society, her usual calm replaced by an expression of guarded resolve. Purbright rose. Mrs. Whittaker, your presence is timely. She nodded slowly. I have come to answer for my part in this. With a quiet dignity, she recounted her motives, a mixture of loyalty to tradition, fear of change, and a desperate attempt to control the narrative that the skeleton represented. The room absorbed her confession with a mixture of shock and understanding. Purbright concluded gently, "This mystery is not about villainy, but about human frailty, the desire to protect, to preserve, to be remembered rightly." As the meeting dispersed, the heavy burden of secrecy began to lift, replaced by tentative steps toward reconciliation. Purbright lingered a moment, considering the fragile balance of truth and civility that defined Flaxborough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight a measure of peace had been restored. The morning sun filtered weakly through the lace curtains of Inspector Purbright's office, casting a delicate pattern of light and shadow upon the orderly array of papers and books. Outside, Flaxborough was stirring to its usual rhythm, shopkeepers setting out wares, the distant chime of church bells, and the measured footsteps of townsfolk attending to their daily routines. Yet beneath this veneer of calm, the ripples of recent revelations continued to settle, reshaping the fabric of the town's quiet existence. Purbright sat at his desk reviewing the notes from the previous evening's gathering. The confession of Mrs. Florence Whitaker, the long-standing president of the Historical Society, had brought clarity and resolution to the tangled mystery of the skeleton's disappearance. Her motives, a complex weave of devotion, fear, and a desperate need to control the narrative, illuminated the undercurrents of human frailty that had driven events to their furtive crescendo. Yet Purbright knew that the story extended beyond a single act. It was a reflection of Flaxborough itself, a community caught between preserving its past and confronting its truths. The inspector's reverie was interrupted by a soft knock. Sergeant Gladys Morris entered, bearing a fresh pot of tea and a quiet smile. "Thought you might need this, sir," she said, setting the pot down. "Thank you, Gladys," Purbright replied, rising to accept the cup. "Your timing is impeccable as ever." She lingered a moment, her eyes reflecting the unspoken understanding of those who have walked alongside the shadows of such investigations. "Do you think the town will truly move on?" she asked quietly. Purbright considered the question carefully. "It will, Gladys, but not without change. The past has a way of shaping the present, sometimes unseen. What matters is that the community now holds a clearer mirror." Later, Purbright made his way to the town hall where the Historical Society convened a special meeting to address the aftermath. The chamber was filled with familiar faces, some marked by relief, others by guarded contemplation. Mrs. Whitaker, though humbled, spoke with measured grace. "I have erred in seeking to control a narrative that belongs to us all. Let this be a moment of reflection and renewal." Leonard Penfold offered his support, emphasizing the importance of transparency and collective stewardship. Evelyn Trent, whose voice had grown steady and respected over the course of the investigation, proposed initiatives to document Flaxborough's history more openly, embracing both its triumphs and its shadows. As the meeting adjourned, Purbright observed the subtle shifts, a town learning to reconcile pride with honesty, tradition with progress. That evening, as the streets emptied and the gas lamps flickered to life, Purbright returned to his modest flat. The white glove, now cleaned and carefully preserved, rested on his mantelpiece, a reminder of the journey from mystery to understanding. He poured himself a small measure of whiskey, savouring its warmth as he reflected on the delicate balance of human nature he had witnessed. In Flaxborough, as in life, the greatest truths often lay not in grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but in the quiet gestures, an overheard remark, a misplaced object, a moment of hesitation that revealed the intricate dance of loyalty, fear, and hope. Purbright knew that while this case had closed, the town would continue its endless negotiations with its past its secrets, and its future. And somewhere in that gentle unfolding, the inspector found his purpose, not in solving puzzles for spectacle, but in tending to the fragile order of a community's shared story. With a final glance around his room, Purbright settled into his chair, the steady ticking of the clock a comforting rhythm. The mystery of the widow and the skeleton had been laid to rest,